Donald Trump for President campaign. Corey Lewandowski. Hey, Corey, good to have you back, man.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on again.
Hey, you guys must be fired up. New CBS poll out again yesterday showing Donald Trump continuing, Corey, to lead the pack, 27% of likely Republican voters. Ben Carson second, 21%. This poll released on Sunday. And here's the other thing. They're the only candidates in double digits. Cruz at 9, Rubio at 8, Jeb, Carly, 6%. I mean, these are amazing numbers. You know what? We're only 3 months removed from Iowa. Corey, you guys got to be feeling very, very, very positive about this. These most recent results, right?
Well, candidly, it's a long way to the first vote in Iowa and the first vote in New Hampshire. It's 119 days before the first vote is cast in New Hampshire. It's 111 days before the first vote is cast in Iowa. That said, we'd rather be in the position we are today than the position that some of the other candidates are in that are polling in the low single digits. But we also are very cognizant of the fact that there are hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in super PACs and campaign accounts that will be spent to distort Mr. Trump's record, to say how he is not the best person for the job. So we're aware of that fact, and we continue to run the race that we want to run, which is going directly to the people, having the opportunity to talk about what it takes to make America great again, and to have a straight talk, a person who is not willing to have political speak and tell the people exactly what they want to hear, well, whether they like it or not, whether they agree or disagree. What we know with Mr. Trump is he tells it exactly like it is, and I think that is one of the reasons that he has resonated so much in this election cycle, because that's what people actually want for a change.
I don't think there's any question. Whenever he speaks, it's like a shot of oxygen, because he is saying exactly what's on his mind. And, a lot of the things that he says, Corey, also, a lot of people say, you know what, I was thinking the same thing, but I really wasn't about to say that. It's like when he was talking about the number of so-called Syrian migrants coming into the U.S. and to Germany and other places, and he was like, why all these men? Why all these young men that seem pretty healthy? Why aren't they back there fighting for their homeland? What's the story with that? A lot of people saying that, but he was the first one on the campaign trail to actually bring that into question, right?
Well, he was, and when you think about it, fundamentally, people say, okay, if you want to leave your country and you're a healthy male, maybe between the age of 18 and 35, why are you leaving your country to go to another country? I can't imagine anyone from our country doing that, right? We would see our men, double down, support their country, make sure that we continue to have the greatest country in the world. And so he raised the issue, hey, are these really, are these the refugees that we're going to be taking in? Do we really need 200,000 additional Syrians coming to our country? Why don't they stay and fight for their own country as opposed to us putting our troops over there fighting for them? Maybe there's just something fundamentally wrong with that.
Super PACs out there that are not for Trump have accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars. We're all anticipating in some of these early states a barrage of negative ads. What is the strategy with that? How do you deal with that?
Here's what I think. I think the American people are tired of politicians who are all talk and no action. I think they're tired of the way Washington has been broken. And if you look at the individuals in this race who are continuing to do exceptionally well, and there's a new Quinnipiac poll out today in Connecticut that shows Donald Trump at 34% in Connecticut. His next closest competitor is Dr. Ben Carson at 14%, and then followed that by Carly Fiorina at 11%. You've got three individuals who have never held elective office, and time and time again in state after state after state, the electorate is saying it is time to change a fundamentally broken Washington, D.C. And so all of these super PACs that have all of this money are going to go out and they're going to say, we need someone who has proven leadership in elective office. And I think that this time in our nation's history is time where people are saying, no, we don't. We've tried this. We've tried it time and time and time again. We've tried it with a first-term U.S. senator who became the president, and our country wasn't better. We've tried it with previous governors and previous senators, and they didn't fix the problem. And now is time to put a business person in charge, because fundamentally what we need is jobs. We need to make our country great again. We need to take the unemployment from really what is 21 or 22% and put people back to work. We need to give people opportunities. We need to stop illegal immigrants from coming across our border. We need to put our country first. And I think when you look at it, the failed politicians of Washington and those who are running on their records or running both for president and for another job at the same time are all talk and no action, and I think the American people are tired of it, and that's why Mr. Trump's message is resonating so well and why he continues to dominate in not only every state poll, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Iowa, but in all the national polls. The CBS national poll has him in first place, and the question is, who do you trust most from a leadership perspective to make our country great again? And Mr. Trump continues to dominate in that particular demographic because people want to have our country great again.
Well, I think, too, many people want to see Donald Trump sitting across the table from the Chinese, from the Japanese, from Putin, right? And
well, that's right. I mean, look, if you have what is, many people will agree, and I've heard this from private business individuals to the best business minds in our country, one of the very best negotiators our country has ever seen from a business perspective. Who do you want negotiating on behalf of our country? Do you want someone who has a proven track record of getting things done, or someone who's never negotiated with a world leader, never built a private business, never had to go and negotiate a contract, has always had the only jobs they've created is through the federal government and through staff members? That's not what the country needs. They need someone who's willing to stand up, face down other world leaders, put our interests first, call out China as a currency manipulator, tell them we won't continue to allow bad trade deals, bring the foreign leaders into the room, try and get things done, but negotiate from a position of strength and not weakness. And unfortunately, many of the other candidates don't have those skills, and that's what our country needs right now.
Now, let's get to the political infrastructure of this thing. As you know, back in May, I was the first person this side of the Milky Way to predict that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee. Once again, Corey, I believe I'm going to be right. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. But look, a lot of the criticism I get from people saying, yeah, you make this prediction, but look, at the end of the day, they don't have the political infrastructure. They don't have the people on the ground. They don't have the organization. But you look around, you've got people in Texas now, Virginia, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. Do you feel right now that you're starting to get the type of ground game infrastructure you're going to need in order to start to compete in these early primaries?
Well, the short answer is yes. And if you look at what we've been able to build, we have taken our resources and put them into the grassroots. So we've got a state director in Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Illinois, Iowa, Texas, Nevada, New Hampshire. I mean, it just continues to grow. We continue to hire every day because we understand that this is a long race, that, the race will not be won or lost completely in Iowa and New Hampshire, and you have to be in this for the long haul. And what we will not do, what we have not done, is what unfortunately Governor Walker did. He hired 90 staffers, most of which were in Wisconsin. They weren't out doing the work that they need to do. They're all sitting in some corporate headquarters somewhere or campaign headquarters. That's not the model that we have. Our model is to find the very best people, put them in the states, collect the signatures required to make sure we're on the ballot in every single state and territory where we need to be there. The nuts and bolts of a campaign. And we continue to build that out, understanding what our timeline is. But what we don't do is just hire people who want to be a foreign policy expert or a domestic policy expert and say, great, we'll pay you some giant salary to sit around the headquarters and pontificate about what we should or shouldn't be doing. That's not our campaign. Our campaign is meticulous. It's very thoughtful. It is executing at the state level, hiring the best people, and having them go out and organize at the state level. And I think we've done a very, very good job of that, and that pays long-term dividends.
Policy-wise, your campaign has come under fire early for not having a lot of substance, yet you've already put out 3 major policy statements: taxes, immigration, and firearms. What's next?
So next we'll talk about the need for VA reform, veterans and veterans reform. That paper is basically done. We'll release that here shortly in the next coming weeks. And then after that we'll talk about China and trade and currency manipulation. We'll also talk about government waste and re-highlight all of the things where our government continues to waste money because they don't have a chief executive or executives who are running these departments who understand fundamentally that it doesn't take $900,000 to move a washer, literally a washer that goes on the end of a screw, from the state of Texas to the state of Alabama. It doesn't cost taxpayers $900,000 to do that. Unfortunately, that's what's taking place. There is so much waste and fraud and abuse in our government system that people are so fed up, they don't want to pay taxes anymore because they're wasted. And that's what we've said. So, we're going to reform the tax code, which is very important, so that everybody, lower income, middle income, has an opportunity to pay less in taxes. We'll let the government rein them in, control the spending that they do, get our deficits under control, create jobs, right? Make sure our veterans are taken care of, make sure we've got a strong military. These are all the things that would happen under the Trump administration if we're fortunate enough to be there. So I can tell you that the position papers have taken care of our veterans, and reforming the VA will be here shortly. We'll talk about, the abuse that China has and others against the United States and the trade deficits that we continue to rack up. And we'll also talk about the need to reform how the government functions in general because of the waste, fraud, and abuse that continue to permeate because there's no accountability at the very top of the organization.
Corey, I want to get to foreign policy. One of the things that Mr. Trump is saying is that he's going to reinvest in the military. Now, talk a little bit about Donald Trump's vision for sending troops to the Middle East. There's a lot of Republicans that are tired of these wars. We haven't gotten anything out of it. And it's tough to talk about sending your young men and women in when migrants, young men, are running away. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I think if you look back at what we have done as a country, right, we spent $2 trillion fighting that war in Iraq. $2 trillion. Lost thousands of great Americans in that war, and you have to ask yourself, what did we get for it? We toppled the dictator, and when we toppled that dictator, what we ended up with was ISIS and ISIL. And, I think what we're seeing in Syria is something that could be a very similar situation. If the U.S. military were to go in and take out Assad, what would happen is there is no strong faction that is backed by the U.S. that anybody can point to that says, here is who is going to take over this government. So what the real problem is, what our primary mission has to be, is to take out ISIS first and foremost. That is the number one threat to our country. It is devastating. They are absolute terrorists of the first order, and if we don't do something to take out ISIS first and foremost, we will end up in a worse position. Once ISIS has been handled in Syria, what we should do is hold Assad accountable, whether that's through the World Court or through some other mechanism. We need to have accountability. But our concern right now is putting U.S. troops on the ground to potentially topple a dictator who, by every account, has been a horrible human being for what he has done to his people. Unfortunately, we don't have the alternative right now, and I think what Mr. Trump has said is let Russia go in, let them bomb ISIS, let them lead that fight, and then once ISIS is fundamentally destroyed, we'll have the opportunity to hold Assad accountable and make sure that we can find the right group of people who can come and take over that country in the right manner. But we cannot allow to have happen what happened in Iraq, which is we take out a dictator and other factions grow who are less accountable, who we have no control over, and have done more damage, candidly, to the region and to our country than ever has been done in the past. So it's a very tenuous situation, and we have to be very careful with it. But committing U.S. ground troops to something is a very dangerous thing and should only be done when the very best interests of our U.S. Interests are at stake. And I think that's a real question right now if that's the case.
So it sounds like, contrary to what Secretary of State John Kerry and others are saying, that that a President Trump would be open to negotiating a settlement that didn't necessarily mandate or dictate that Assad be out of there, right?
Well, I think Assad has to be held accountable. There's no question about it. I mean, there's no question he has to be held accountable. But the question is, really, if you hold Assad accountable today, what happens to the rest of that country? What happens to all the people there? What happens to the factions that are warring? What is the stability? Does ISIS continue to grow under Assad? Or if Assad is taken out, does ISIS grow more? Or if Assad is left there, is there an opportunity to control the terrorist threat, which is ISIS, which is significantly more dangerous to us as a country than Assad? And I think what we would have the opportunity to do is to hold Assad accountable moving forward once the initial threat of ISIS was eradicated.
Right. So top priority is get ISIS out of there and then figure it out without saying that, look, Assad has to go before we do anything, which has really been, in a way, what our position is at the end of the day. I want to get to domestic policy and jobs. We had just the other day come out, Corey, another anemic jobs growth in the U.S. Mr. Trump often talks about that he would be the greatest jobs president in the history of the Republic. Walk us through in about 2 minutes how that would happen.
Well, first and foremost, you have to look at past experience to look at future opportunities. And Donald Trump is the only person in this race who has actually created tens of thousands of jobs and continues to do that on 5 continents around the globe. So, you have the opportunity to put a career politician in place that has created, 17 or 18 jobs because they're a U.S. senator and those are their staff positions, or a former governor or a current governor who's created jobs in the government by, patronage or helping their friends. But none of these individuals, with all due respect, have had the opportunity to create jobs on their own and stimulate the economy. And so Mr. Trump's ability by cutting the corporate tax rate is very important. Bringing back the money which is sitting overseas, as much as $2.5 trillion, making those companies bring that money back from overseas and invest it here in our country is a critical component of putting people back to work. And then giving people opportunities by lowering their individual tax rates and move them up their socioeconomic status because they're getting better jobs is critical. The only way that happens is through an aggressive tax plan. It allows us to give everybody great opportunities. It allows you to stop being double taxed. You get rid of the death tax, you get rid of the marriage penalty tax. It allows charitable tax contributions to stay in place. It allows you to continue to deduct your home interest mortgage deduction, which is a huge deduction for many, many people because their home is their biggest asset. So what you have to do is you have to give people the opportunity to have more money in their pocket. And that allows businesses and either to expand or individuals to start small businesses. And by doing so, the economy will grow, and we will grow our way out of a 1 or 2% growth rate and get much more back in line with 3 or 4%, which is what our country has been accustomed to. And once we do that, and we achieve a 3 or 4% growth rate, which is not unreasonable, God forbid we ever get to 5 or 6, the country would be humming.
Right.
Our deficits would continue to shrink to a point where we don't continue to burden the next generation, the generation after that, with $19 trillion.
So the key is getting the growth to 3, 4, 5%, right? Once we do that with your tax plan, then we're going to start to, in effect, grow our way out of the debt that we have. That's
right. And what will happen is, and companies will have more resources available to grow. They'll be taxed at a lower tax rate, so they'll be taxed at a 15% tax rate, which is significantly better than where they are now, which allows them more opportunity to expand. Right? It allows the individual sole proprietor not to have to pay double tax, whether it's on their personal or their business, because right now they're getting banged both ways. Right? So that allows more money into the system, which means more spending you have, more money in the pocket you have, more money in your bank account you have. That allows the economy to grow. Once our economy grows, everything rises. A rising tide lifts all boats.
Right.
And that's something that we need to do for everybody.
That's going to be the bottom line. We're out of time. We want to thank Corey Lewandowski, National Campaign Manager, Donald Trump for President. Want more info, DonaldJTrump.com. We'll see you, Corey, tomorrow night, Richmond.